Okay, well, we're up to 28 and it's 2 after, so I think we go ahead and get started. So thanks everyone for joining us and taking some time out of your lunch and your work day to talk housing law and code updates with us. My name is Emily Elliott. I'm a planner with Michael Baker International. I primarily work in the Inland Empire. I'm also the IES-APA section director for this and next year. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Alex Chapman, who's a planner too on our team. And he and I do a lot of work together, helping agencies with their housing elements and implementing their housing element programs. There we go. So first, just kind of wanted to welcome everyone. We're excited to discuss housing law and its implications for local municipal code updates. I intend for this to be really a roundtable discussion. We're going to present a variety of code updates or bills that will trigger likely code updates in your jurisdictions. But by no means are we total experts or attorneys. So we're just planners trying to help other planners and hope to have a discussion with everyone at the end of this webinar. I also want to note that this session is eligible for CM credits, and sorry about the kind of blurry image there, but that's the name if you go to look for it on the APA website, local code updates for new state housing laws. So if you are AICP, please go in and log your credits. So today we'll be addressing about 20 bills that have been adopted by the state since 2019. And the bills are organized for the following topics. Homeless housing, which covers low barrier navigation centers, emergency shelters, and supportive housing. Affordable housing development, which includes updates relating to religious institution affiliated housing developments, mixed income development standards, and updating the density bonus provisions. Let's see. And then we also will be covering updates to development standards for accessory dwelling units. And finally, the updates to cover housing development. These include provisions for allowing small home lot development on certain parcels and small housing developments using floor area ratio. So if you are coming here to learn about maybe SB 9, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I feel like we could probably do a whole webinar just on that one. So we wanted to focus on a lot of the bills that really are just a little more cut and dry that you can just take and make the amendments to your codes, but kind of like providing a list of everything that, planners in California will be working on over this next year or so. So real quick, I just wanted to talk about how to participate in today's session. So this is a webinar and it is being recorded. We will be putting it on the section YouTube account once the recording is done. So if you have a colleague that's not able to attend and they wanted to get those free CM credits, they can watch it on our YouTube. Because it is a webinar, we do have a webinar chat and there's also a Q&A box. And like I said, we'll have a discussion at the end. And what we'll do is ask people who want to participate to raise their hands on Zoom, and we'll go ahead and unmute you. And the idea is to just, again, have that roundtable discussion. We'd really like to hear what agencies have already gotten started on their code amendments, what approaches they may be taking or challenges they're experiencing, and just generally share ideas and experiences so we can all help each other. All right, so I'm ready to jump in with our first topic of homeless housing. So in order to address the homeless crisis, the state's focused on adopting new laws to facilitate the development of housing for the homeless population. These housing options are often linked to services that can help improve homeless individuals' health and to move them to permanent housing. Homeless housing includes low barrier navigation centers, emergency shelters, or supportive housing. Oh, sorry, I guess I was supposed to be clicking along there to bring these up for you. There we go. All right, so the Low Barrier Navigation Center is a low barrier, temporary, service-enriched shelter that helps homeless individuals and families quickly obtain permanent housing. The emergency shelter is housing or shelter for persons experiencing homelessness. And supportive housing is housing with no limit on length of stay, and that is linked to off-site or on-site services that assist the supportive housing resident in retaining the housing, improving his or her health status, and maximizing his or her ability to live and, when possible, work in the community. One aspect addressed is the low barrier navigation centers, or LBNCs. LBNCs must be allowed by right in areas that allow mixed use and multifamily housing. So such zones must be amended to permit LBNCs by right, subject to certain limitations. To ensure that low barrier navigation centers are constructed and operated in a manner that is consistent with the requirements and allowances of state law, zoning codes must require that low barrier navigation centers provide connected services, have a coordinated entry system, are compliant with the Welfare and Institutions Code, and have a homeless management information system. Similar changes may be required to your codes to update zoning ordinances regarding emergency shelters. This bill's a little bit older, and I think a lot of jurisdictions have already made this change, but in case yours hasn't, AB 139 limits parking standards for emergency shelters to base parking requirements on staff levels only, rather than the number of beds provided. Jurisdictions cannot apply other development standards that do not apply within the underlying zone to emergency shelters. All right, and as with low barrier navigation centers and emergency shelters, AB 2162 requires agencies to approve supportive housing ministerially in zones where multifamily and mixed uses are permitted for projects that meet this state definition. And we went and put that state definition on the screen there. Additionally, supportive housing must meet the requirements outlined by the state, and agencies will need to apply objective standards applicable to other multi-projects in the same zone.
Great. Thanks, Emily. So now I'll be going over new legislation affecting affordable housing development, starting with the benefits and purpose. So next slide. State law has been amended to facilitate the development of affordable housing over recent years. These include the use of mixed income developments to promote neighborhood integration. And these laws focus on both projects that provide 100% affordable housing and projects that are mixed income developments. They provide regulatory relief, such as reduction of development standards to promote affordable housing. And topics addressed in this category include religious institution affiliated housing developments, mixed income developments, and density bonus provisions. So first, we'll discuss religious institution affiliated housing developments. To comply with changes required by state law, religious institution affiliated housing development must meet several criteria as provided by the state. Additionally, parking standards must be amended. Specifically, religious institution or assembly parking may count towards religious institution affiliated housing parking requirements. That is up to 50% of existing religious institution or assembly parking spaces may be eliminated as part of the affiliated housing development project. The parking standards are applicable unless the parcel is located within 1/2 mile walking distance of either a high quality transit corridor or a major transit stop as defined in the Public Resource Code, or there is a car share vehicle located within 1 block of the parcel. Next slide. This slide summarizes the changes that are needed to be incorporated into a jurisdiction's zoning ordinance regarding mixed income developments. AB 491 requires that a mixed income multifamily structure provide the same access and amenities of the structure to occupants of the affordable housing units as are provided to occupants of market rate ones. Changes to the zoning ordinance include ensuring that the affordable units in a mixed income development are not isolated to a specific floor or area on a specific floor. It also consists of making sure occupants of affordable units in the mixed use income development have the same access to ingress and egress, common areas, and other amenities as provided for occupants of the market rate units. Next slide. So additionally, all proposed projects that require residential unit demolition shall provide replacement units as outlined in the state law. Replacement units must be provided at the same income level of those demolished. Requirements include mandating that at least 55 years of affordability for the replacement units. Also, the replacement units must be equivalent in size and have the same number of bedrooms as the demolished ones. And lastly, the replacement units must be available at affordable rents and occupied by persons and families in the same or lower income categories as the demolished ones. If the previous rental rates or income levels are not known, they shall be assumed to be the same proportion as overall lower income renter households in the jurisdiction. Next slide. So multiple changes to density bonus provisions may be necessary to comply with state law now. This includes adding student housing, in which at least 20% of the units are reserved for lower income as eligible for density bonus. It also includes amending the density bonus table to align with state law, which now consists of adding a bonus of 100% affordable developments and increasing the maximum density bonus from 35 to 50%. No parking spaces are required for projects that are 100% affordable now to lower income households, senior projects, and special needs housing developments that are within 1/2 mile of accessible fixed bus routes, servicing and operating at least 8 times per day. Next. So additionally, changes are required for 100% affordable housing located in VMT efficient areas. New state laws allow for such projects to have unlimited density and to receive a height increase of 3 stories or 33 feet in height. So like I just said, projects eligible for these density bonuses must be within 1/2 mile of a major transit station or located within VMT efficient areas. It's also important to note that a jurisdiction can impose regulations to these projects, such as setbacks and density standards, as long as they are not in conflict with the state law. Next, I'll hand it back to you, Emily.
Perfect, thanks. So we're going to switch gears real quick to ADUs. And we'll talk about some of the recent changes to state ADU law. Last year, we definitely saw some of the bills on ADUs kind of slow down a little bit, but there's still some that we want to cover. So we've been seeing kind of yearly updates on regulations to facilitate ADU development. And these regulations focus on ensuring a faster approval process, allowing larger ADUs in both height and size, and providing flexibility so that properties can accommodate an ADU. State law changes include addressing the approval process, height, setbacks, and size. All right, so this slide shows new changes required by state law that apply to ADUs, and these include square footage and height requirements, applicable setbacks, removal of requirements that inhibit construction of ADUs, such as minimum lot size, the number of ADUs and junior ADUs that are allowed on a single property, and allowing the sale of ADUs separate from the primary residence in specific situations when sold to a qualifying nonprofit. To comply with the new state laws, jurisdictions must allow attached ADUs of at least 850 square feet or 1,000 square feet, depending on the number of bedrooms. A setback is the required distance between the building or structure and the lot lines, and to comply with the state law, setbacks must be updated to 4 feet. In addition, parking setback requirements must be removed. And to comply with new state law, the zoning ordinance needs to allow both an ADU and JEDU. Finally, nonprofits can sell ADUs to lower income families separate from the primary residence, and the property must be preserved as affordable housing for 45 years. So that was a lot. I know a lot of agencies do have specific ADU ordinances now, but it wouldn't hurt to take a pass and second look and make sure that they're up to date with all of these new requirements.
Great, thanks, Emily. Okay, so next slide. The final topic of changes is housing development. Specifically, changes relate to larger goals of incentivizing middle income housing, such as townhomes. They also provide opportunities for infill development. The required changes here fall under two categories: small lot subdivisions and small housing developments utilizing floor area ratio. Next slide. Okay, so the state law establishes specific requirements that must be met for small lot subdivision projects. A zoning code should include a definition which outlines requirements for small home lot developments, and such requirements include that a lot is zoned for multifamily, parcel is no larger than 5 acres, and is substantially surrounded by qualified urban uses, and the subdivision would also be subject to other minimum requirements in the zoning ordinance, such as height, setback, etc. The law prohibits a small home development on a housing element site identified for low income or very low income household. Next. So finally, an exemption from the minimum lot size requirement was added for multifamily and mixed use projects that include floor area ratio that meets the requirements as set in the California Government Code. Note that all other applicable requirements must be met, including meeting the densities established by jurisdiction, zoning ordinance, or the GP. And then next, we're moving to our roundtable.
Yeah, well, thanks, Alex. So what we're going to ask folks to do in your Zoom controls, you have the ability to raise your hand. And if you'd like to participate in discussion or ask a question or just share what your experience has been with any of these laws and implementing them in your jurisdictions or for your clients, go ahead and just raise your hand and we'll go through the list and unmute everyone.
Emily, we have a question from Rocio L, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute. So Rocio, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, if you guys have been, if you've raised your hand, we've basically given you permission to unmute yourself. So just go ahead. So Matthew, I see you're on.
Yeah.
What's going on with Riverside?
Well, it does feel like I'm bringing a code amendment to our council to clean our ordinance up to address changes to state law just about every year now, sometimes twice a year. But I actually had a question that I wanted to ask the group. So, in my jurisdiction, our approach has been, regardless of whether or not you've got an ordinance on the books that implements some of these, you have to allow them anyways. So, for example, I know that we're not necessarily discussing SB 9 today, but just to use it as an example, you have to take SB 9 applications even if you don't have an SB 9 ordinance, or say your jurisdiction did not have a fully compliant ADU ordinance that is most up to date with the most current version. You still have to permit those units to whatever the current law says. So I guess my question for the group is, how have you guys approached that, and have you gotten pushback from management, from elected leaderships, from neighbors, and how are you handling those things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Does anyone from an agency want to respond to Matt's question?
Hey Emily, this is Robert Flores. I work with this at the city of San Jacinto, and I agree with Matthew that even if a jurisdiction does not have an ordinance that addresses each of these topics or other housing topics like SB 9, we are still required to comply with state law, and oftentimes some of these bills or state codes say that if you don't have an ordinance, you have to fall back to the state requirements. And so, yeah, I agree that you have to comply with it. As far as if there's any pushback, from my experience, both here at the city and at the county of Riverside, a lot of the leadership and management have come to an acceptance of these bills that are coming down the pipeline. Not necessarily they like the bills or what's being allowed, especially when you're talking about taking local control over land use approvals, but they've accepted the fact that this is the new trend, and that's why, in my experience, there's been a lot of jurisdictions that jump on the bandwagon of updating their codes and making them consistent with state law. One thing that's funny though is I recently read an article that Huntington Beach, I believe it is challenging the states on these housing laws, and they've actually recently, I think just the other day, approved something, an ordinance or something, in order to say that they're not going to be accepting any more applications for AB or for ADUs and SB9 because of this challenge. So I don't know how that works. I'm not a lawyer, but I read that recently, so that's kind of funny to this topic.
They're a very special case there, aren't they?
They are, yeah.
I
Good
guess
luck
I
to
have
them.
a couple of thoughts on that. So, we know as planners that we need to implement state law, whether it's on the local jurisdiction's books or not. And it seems that, most sophisticated developers know what those laws are and know the right questions to ask to have those laws apply to their projects. But I think the real importance with amending our local codes is so that, less sophisticated developers, or just, the regular guy, gal that wants to do an ADU in their backyard, they should be able to go to their local code and see exactly what the requirements are, and that those, are up to date. And it is a big effort. And in terms of like scheduling that effort, I would probably recommend turning to your housing element, because I'm willing to bet that most of these are tucked into your housing element program somewhere, and there's some sort of timeline attached to them, whether it's like, well, everyone's is going to be a little different, but what we've seen is a lot of folks saying, by Q3 of 2024, they're going to have certain amendments done to their zoning ordinance. So I think that might be like the approach that I would take or recommend, especially for an agency where they're just really overwhelmed and this is just like another thing that's getting piled on. At least just try to stick with the schedule or the update that's already defined in your housing element.
Yeah, I would only add to that it is a good idea to update local codes, because a lot of these new laws and a lot of these requirements are essentially removing planners out of the equation, and just making these uses as by right, where only a building permit is required for an ADU, or even duplex under SB9, or just other homeless shelters, or even supportive transitional housing and things of that nature. So oftentimes in jurisdictions, especially larger jurisdictions, planners don't even get to see these applications. So you need something for the lower level staff, land use development planning techs that are processing these projects, reviewing these permits for consistency with the requirements. They need something to read that's simple, something they're familiar with, that local code, because these staff members, they oftentimes don't know how to read state law. They don't know where to go to see if they're compliant, and if you don't have a code that's updated, they're lost. So
Yeah, it's a good point.
On that point, Emily and Alex and Robert and everyone that has joined us today, we received a comment from Pilar L. And if you'd like, I could read her comment. But essentially, the comment mentions that in City of Rancho Mirage, they've received a SB9 application. The biggest change was that now it is a staff level approval and no longer requires a public hearing. Planning commission in this case, when before all single family homes were noticed and people were provided the opportunity to voice and input on and provide input on the decision. And so it looks like in the City of Rancho Mirage, some residents have questioned some of these latest developments that are being proposed, and they're receiving a bit of pushback. So to the point that Robert Flores mentioned earlier, that everything is ministerial, or ministerial approvals are happening more often. People the general public may lose that opportunity to have their voice in a public hearing. So just wanted to share with you all that comment that we received. So thank you, Pilar.
Some might argue that that's a feature and not a bug.
Right.
That's kind of the idea. In fact, the idea of having I mean, I'm from a larger jurisdiction, so I guess it makes sense. The idea of holding a public hearing for a single family home is like, wow.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question too. In Rancho Mirage, does that apply to like just an individual single family home on an infill lot, or is, you know, like, do those go to planning commission, or is it just, you know, subdivisions? All single
So
family homes. Okay,
single
wow.
family
Wow.
homes. And you know, that I have heard from some coastal cities and also Rancho Mirage in this case, that single family homes in the past might have required public hearing. So, or at least a design committee review. But these are all changes that are happening statewide, and so it's changing the process. Absolutely.
Yeah,
One thing I might I want to say in response or as a result of Rancho Mirage's comment is, you know, like Emily said, it's a good idea to update your code and incorporate all these housing requirements, but to the benefit of the community and the residents, since these are all being considered by right uses, no longer discretionary ministerial, staff is the only one that sees it. Nobody else has the opportunity to see it. Updating your code is probably a good idea to provide the community an opportunity to comment on these changes and what's going to be allowed and what's not going to be allowed. So they're not going to comment on a case by case of every ADU that comes in, every SB9 case that comes in, but they will have, with an update of a code, as we all know, requires a public hearing, requires noticing, things of that nature. The community, the residents have the opportunity then to speak to some of the development standards that are being proposed. Obviously, a lot of this is state law, so you can't change or deviate too much from it in a certain way, but at least they can feel heard and they can understand what's going on in that one opportunity rather than on a case by case in every situation.
yeah, that's a really good point. And full disclosure, the kind of the backbone of our presentation actually came out of a public outreach effort for a jurisdiction that is doing a wholesale code cleanup, just to let, you know, give the community an opportunity to know what's coming, even though we have to do this, but like letting the community know, well, we have to do this and this is what you can expect. And that was the outreach process that occurred outside of, you know, the public hearing process through a series of community workshops. So definitely opportunity there, but again, it's just piling on to the already pretty big pile.
Yeah.
Yeah, Emily, that's almost exactly what I was going to say that, you know, Riverside did when we were developing our latest round of ADU ordinance updates. One thing that I found helpful through that process was, well, so first of all, you kind of get two different types of attendees at those kinds of outreach meetings. You get people who are upset and people who are really interested in doing one of these things. So that was always a fun mix. The other thing is that, you know, we use them as kind of an opportunity of like, it's an opportunity to let the public know and, you know, kind of vent their frustrations if they have them, or find, you know, ask questions and learn more if they want to do that about what we have to do. But then we also presented the opportunity to, you know, have people give us input on, well, here's some things that we can do, you know, in terms of like design standards or what have you. What do you think we should, you know, how should we approach these? Like, here's the latitude that we do have and the choices that we can make. So help us make those decisions. And I think that helps people feel like they have a little bit of control.
Yeah, you know, that really ties in with a question we got put in the Q&A box, or maybe more of a comment. The writer said, I think the reliance on ministerial review leads to the importance of adopting objective design guidelines to lead to development outcomes the community wants. So definitely involving the community in the establishment of those standards is going to be critical.
Yeah, I think that Matthew's right. We've all encountered the folks that attend the public hearings for these types of updates, but in some instances, we just have to say, we're doing the bare minimum of what state law. Obviously, we can do more, but what state law is allowing. But you do have to phrase it or put it in a way where, well, this is what we have to do, but we have flexibility here. Give the community, the residents, the opportunity where you're able to do it, to participate. I think that's a great idea because that allows them to feel involved and feel that they participated. And oftentimes that eliminates a lot of these conflicts you have with these ADUs or other type of housing that goes in. Not all of them, but most of them. Most of the time, when I've dealt with irate or angry individuals about things that are going into their community, housing that's going into the community that they knew nothing about, oftentimes you just have to educate them, and then once they know what's going on, they're okay. So this does provide an opportunity for that.
I'd like to know if anyone has encountered AB 803 yet. That was the small home subdivision, small home, small lot
Yeah.
development. That one's fairly new.
That was actually going to be my next question, is if we could pivot back to that one, because I was a little bit like, wait a minute,
Yeah,
did I miss this one?
yeah. So yeah, it's let's see. I think
It's
it got labeled like,
2022.
yeah, it got labeled like the Starter Home Revitalization Act of 2021. Let's see. I have some like the bill summary up in front of me. So if you guys bear with me for a minute, I'll kind of read it to you. But it says the bill would authorize a development proponent to submit an application for the construction of small home lot development as defined that meets specific or specified criteria. And the bill would require a small home lot development to be located on a parcel that is no larger than 5 acres, is substantially surrounded by qualified urban uses, and is zoned for multifamily residential use. The bill would require a small home lot development to meet minimum unit requirements and to consist of single family housing units with an average total area of floor space of 1,750 feet or less. And the bill would require that units comply with the external existing height and setback requirements applicable to the multifamily site. It would also need to comply with any local inclusionary housing ordinance. And you wouldn't be able to apply this type of project if the site had been identified as a low or very low income site in your housing element. So what it sounds like is, so anything zoned multifamily could potentially have small lot subdivision on it, subject to the same development standards as multifamily, provided that it's not in your arena as a low or very low income site. So not one that I've run across yet in implementation. And I was just curious if anyone else has seen an application for something like this come through their counter.
This is interesting. I wonder if the bill specifies that it has to be like a conventional subdivision of fee simple lots for sale, or if this would apply to like a condominiumized type of development.
Yeah.
Also, the limitation to the multifamily zone only makes me think that this might be a little bit rare depending on your local market conditions.
Mhm.
If you have a big multifamily site that somebody's going for development on, and it doesn't, at least for Riverside, doesn't seem likely to me that someone would opt to do a small lot subdivision instead of like, a multifamily development, but you never know.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see, there was a question of how would minimum densities for the multifamily residential zone apply? Well, I think like if you had like a multifamily zone, like an R2, maybe it goes to like 15 units to the acre, you could potentially do a small lot subdivision that could, meet that 15 units to the acre. I guess depending on how small you make the units and the space in between.
Hey, Emily, I think we have a few people that raised their hand.
Yeah, the
to
questions are
discussion.
trickling in, so perhaps maybe we could first go with Taylor, and then I think Kimberly could go next.
It was just about a previous topic. I forgot to lower my hand, I guess. Sorry.
Okay,
No problem.
completely fine. And Kimberly, let's go ahead and if you can, we'll ask you to unmute and you could just share your question with us.
Okay. Hello, I'm sorry, not Kimberly. This is Doug Darnell with the City of Menifee. Just on Kimberly's computer.
Okay, that's fine.
So what I'm curious about is with this AB 803, anything in regards to the process, it didn't hear anything about, is this like an exemption, like an infill exemption type of thing, or material process? It doesn't sound like there's anything that changes in terms of the development review process on this. Can anybody answer that?
Yeah, I picked up on that too. So it requires it to be less than 5 acres and surrounded by urban uses, which makes me think class 32 exemption, right? And it's consistent with the zoning code in that, well, I guess it would be consistent with the zoning code in that it only applies to multifamily development, and this bill says like that's okay to do small lot subdivision there. So
But nothing related to the process.
no, let's see. Checking through our notes to see if we have anything more on it. Qualified urban use, let's see. Okay, and then substantially surrounded, they gave a definition of 75% of the perimeter of the project site adjoins or is separated only by an improved public right of way. It's helpful to have that.
I don't see anything on process.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
that's a good question though. Something for us to all dig into.
So everyone, I also received a question that was text to me. I have several friends that are on this webinar and they're inquisitive, but generally I received one question from Rocio Lopez, and she mentioned that she's currently working on an affordable senior housing project. And apparently her project requires a general plan amendment, change of zone, amendment to a specific plan. So she was wondering if any of these latest laws would provide any relief for any of the entitlements or the CEQA review for the project. And I know that's a multi-layered question, so maybe we could take the question offline and maybe provide a response afterwards. But just generally, from your knowledge, would this project relate to any of these latest laws?
I mean, without knowing too many details, I would say whenever there's legislative applications involved, there's typically not much relief. That kind of kicks it into a whole another level. So needing a specific plan amendment and a general plan amendment kind of take it out of any potential streamlining. But if anyone else wants to comment on that, go for it.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, I don't know what your general plan says or what the general plan for the site is, but we in Riverside have promoted the use of the Housing Accountability Act, where the general plan allows for something that the zoning doesn't, in order to get projects out of having to go that legislative route. So if that's an option that's available to you, you should look into it.
That's good. That's clever.
That's great. And we also have another hand from Lorena.
Yeah.
She's from the city of Loma Linda. So
Loma.
I'm just gonna go ahead and let her talk, and she could just go ahead and share
Hi.
her question or comment.
Hi, good afternoon. I really appreciate your comments and all the questions coming in, because us too in Loma Linda, we've always processed a notice of public hearing for single family residential. And it wasn't only until recently where one of our consultants says, no, you shouldn't be doing that. So because it's in the process and we don't have any staff to help me do these code updates, what I ended up doing is just doing a public notice that went out. So it was more semantics, just changing it, where instead of calling it a public hearing, it's just a public notice and you're welcome to comment if you'd like to, but I'm going to approve this. So that's just kind of how I got around it, because it's basically already codified and we just haven't done the amendments, and that's just how we've been processing it as long as I could remember. Like Robert was suggesting, by doing these housing code updates, and amendments. Hopefully, it'll be in line with what the state requires from us. So then we could be consistent with what the state requires. But to get to my point, what I'm really trying to ask is, I still can't wrap my head around the density bonus law. And I know you did a really quick one slide presentation. So it's unclear to me how much control does city staff have when somebody comes saying, hey, I want a density bonus and just, I don't want to do any parking and I want this and that. Are we allowed to say no? Absolutely. What are you thinking? You can't put that 12-unit apartment design on that lot with 0 parking. How much control do cities have when somebody just throws that at us?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And updating your local density bonus to match state law will hopefully help answer some of those questions, because it really does get spelled out. Basically, there's a pretty big matrix, and you may have seen it, but it's basically like how many units are affordable, or what percentage are affordable, kind of then what does that equal in terms of a density bonus, and then how many incentives can the developer be eligible for. So it's really like project specific and tied to the amount of affordable units and then what affordability level they are at.
So do we have a right to say no to certain incentives?
I mean, not if they're guaranteed that incentive in the law.
Okay.
There's a very high legal bar to turning to denying a request for a waiver or incentive like that. You basically have to make a finding supported by substantial evidence in the record that it will have a specific quantifiable impact on public health or safety, which is not easy to do.
Yeah. And there is a little flexibility in the jurisdiction to choose like what incentives it wants to make available, but there's not a whole lot of discretion that's left.
Thank you.
I guess something that I want to mention, and I'm not sure if anyone from WRCOG or SBCTA is on. I have a little bit more familiarity with SBCTA, but they are in the process of pursuing the REAP 2.0. That's the Regional Early Action Planning Grant. And they do have plans to roll out technical assistance programs. So if you're a San Bernardino County jurisdiction, later this summer, I'm anticipating that there's going to be technical assistance available to you. And it's specifically geared at doing this kind of work of helping get code amendments together, write staff reports, get them through hearing, do the outreach. So just kind of something to keep on your radar if it's something that you need help with in your jurisdiction.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with the specifics, but I know that WRCOG does pursue these grants and does provide its member jurisdictions opportunities for not just ordinance amendments, but also, like I think earlier there was a mention on design guidelines, objective design guidelines for application of these new requirements. So WRCOG does have some opportunity. You can look into what they have to offer.
Yeah, and I think actually WRCOG did put out like a nice toolkit for objective design standards.
They did.
Yeah.
They did. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Doug again. Yeah, just to chime in. Yeah, WRCOG is applying for REAP grant funding for, like you said, the toolkit, and then also SB9, model SB9 ordinance for cities to use, and any other code update assistance, I believe. So
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so there's help out there. It's just a lot of times like we don't know who to ask or how to get it. Again, kind of speaking for SBCTA, there is the Planning Directors Technical or Planning and Development Technical Forum that happens every month, and all planning directors in the county are invited, and that's usually where that stuff gets announced. So if you're a long range planner, poke your director and tell them to go to those meetings.
And everyone, we also have a question from Gustavo Gonzalez. So Gustavo, please go ahead and just unmute yourself. And
Yeah, hi, can everyone hear me?
Just fine.
loud and clear.
Hey, well, good afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, I know we didn't talk about this one, it wasn't listed on here, but SB 330. So I just wanted to get a sense of everybody's understanding of that. We've had one application come through our shop, and in talking to our attorneys, it seems like the key thing there is to ensure that we preserve the density as prescribed by the general plan. And I just wanted to get a sense of whether everybody is the same understanding, right? So you have to basically, forego development standards, or you have to bend on the development standards in order to preserve that density. That density needs to be maintained, whatever the general plan density is for that specific property. So I'm just curious to get everybody's thoughts on whether that was the interpretation that everyone got when that one came through a couple years ago.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. And we've seen some of our clients update their zoning ordinances to better match their general plans. There are some cases where the zoning permitted lower density than the general plan designation did on the same site. So it was been updated so that general plan density does prevail.
Okay,
One
so
thing-
like I'm sorry, just real quick, if for example, if you had a project and then you weren't meeting the development standard, let's say you were within a setback or whatever, you were encroaching into a setback, does that mean that you don't have to go through a variance process to be able to allow that project, and basically you just throw out that development standard and don't have to go through a formal variance process?
I mean, is there no way to achieve that density without, like, are they just trying to build out and not up? Like, it seems like there would be a feasible way to achieve the density without needing a variance.
Well, because if you're hitting the maximum density, so let's in our case, I think it was like, I don't know, like something like 8 dwelling units to the acre. They were trying to do a zone change and a general plan amendment, and I don't think they saw the writing on the wall, or they saw the writing on the wall from the council that wasn't going to be approved. So they went the SB 330 route and said, okay, let's just get the maximum density that's allowed by this zone. And so they ended up with like 41 units. And in the review process, as we were applying the development standards, there were certain things where, okay, if you start to chip away at the development standards, the setbacks, whatever, then you end up with less units, right? But it always came back to like, well, that 41 units need to be preserved. So if we need to give way on a certain development standards, then we need to give way on it, right? And without having to go through a formal variance process.
Yeah.
Well, I think, and I'll just touch base on a few clarifying points that from my understanding of SB 330. By no means I'm an attorney, and it's correct, but and I see Matthew has his hand raised. He may have some feedback as well, but from my understanding of SB 330, to me, that's a two-piece legislation. The first piece is it changes several government code sections, including public hearings and requirements for housing developments and things of that nature, and establishes the preliminary application process for in order to vest the project and housing development and move it forward. The second piece to that is the piece of the legislation that just applies to affected areas, whether that's an affected city or affected county area. And that's where that provision where you cannot downzone, or actually it reads somewhat like you cannot change policy, which the general plan has density and that's policy. You cannot change that policy to downzone a property and lose units that are already in the books. That only applies to affected areas. So you have to verify if your city is an affected area, and then you essentially cannot downzone. So you can't process a general plan amendment or change a zone that would change that density. But I don't know how your developer is applying this to an actual, or that developer is applying it to an actual development, and how they're using that provision for that specific project. I don't know what part of SB 330 they're using. If they're going through the preliminary application process, that would vet the project, and if it meets all the criteria, it basically freezes all the criteria, that all the development standards and design guidelines that are in place at that point, so that they cannot change and the process can move forward with what was established at that point, even if you update your general plan, change your code. So I'm not sure what part of SB 330 they're using to throw the density, the fixed density at your city, but that's my 2 cents in understanding of SB 330.
Yeah, Gus, we actually have a technical assistance inquiry and with HCD on this exact question right now about the development standards under the Housing Accountability Act, what we are obligated to do. My read of it is that if application of the development standard would absolutely preclude you from achieving the density that's authorized by the general plan, then you have no choice but to waive it.
Yeah.
If it is a development standard that is merely inconvenient to the development and not actually going to preclude that the achieving the density, like you could get the density that's allowed, it might be a weird design or something like that, but it doesn't strictly prohibit it or preclude it. That's what our inquiry is, and HCD didn't even know how to answer this question. So they have the new housing accountability unit, and they've got like a portal that you can submit these kinds of TA requests through. But so we've got that in with them now. So I'd be happy to share with everyone
yeah,
what we hear
would-
from them.
Yeah,
That would be
Matt,
good. Thanks,
actually,
Matt. Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
sorry,
like
go
if you
ahead.
could let us know at APA, that'd be something we'd be happy to stick in our newsletter just to help get that word out.
Sure. We also have a technical assistance request in with them for how does the Housing Accountability Act apply when you have the reverse situation where the zoning permits greater density than the general plan does. So we'll
Right.
share that one too.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other one that I wanted to quickly bring up too was the AB 2011. So we're dealing with that one as well. That's the one that allows housing on commercial sites. And as a matter of fact, we're giving a workshop to our planning commission coming up next month. And we have a site where the general plan is commercial, yet the zoning is not consistent. It's like agriculture or something like that. And there's a housing developer that wants to build apartments on it. Again, reading the council, they're likely not going to get the change of zone or the general plan amendment to turn it into multifamily. But going through AB 2011, they may be able to get housing on it if it's affordable, either mix or 100% affordable. And I think the read from our city attorney's office is that if the general plan designation is residential, I'm sorry, commercial, and even if the zoning is not consistent, that it would allow that project to go through just because the general plan is already setting, the policy for it to be commercial and therefore for AB 2011 to apply, which would allow that the multifamily housing on that site. If it has affordability, it requires additional things like, prevailing wage and other things that may prevent some developers from going forward with it. But nonetheless, it's one of those that we're having to kind of struggle and figure out now. And I think, Matthew, thank you for bringing up that technical assistance. I think that's a good place to start when you have a lot of these questions and just kind of reaching out to HCD about this stuff.
They're a little slow, but they're super eager to help. So
Yeah.
Okay, well, gosh, it's 12:58, and so I wanted to take a quick minute before we all depart to just thank everyone for attending today. Really like this roundtable format. Again, none of us pretend to be real experts. We're all just doing what we can, and I like the idea of kind of coming together as a community of planners to help each other through the things that we're trying to do in our day-to-day. I do also just want to add that the Inland Empire section of APA is working diligently to bring more content to you guys. We want to make sure that you're getting value out of the organization as members. Next month, we're going to be promoting an event that's actually hosted by Northern Section APA. And if you're AICP, you'll want to pay attention to this because you'll be able to get an ethics CM credit. So be on the lookout for an e-blast for that event with the registration information. And with that, I just want to thank State APA, Brian, and also thank Rob and Robert and Alex for joining me today. So thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Hey, Emily, before we leave, can I just make an announcement? Real quickly, if you do not mind, there's a link in the chat box for a survey. If you would take that survey after this webinar, that would really assist us in moving forward our efforts with programming, as Emily mentioned as well.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.